All right, there we go. Welcome everybody to part two of our week-long live 2021 live stream extravaganza. This today, or man, this part, man, my whole pattern for intro is all thrown off because now we're doing a bunch of streams every day. So welcome everybody. Today we're gonna be, or in this episode, we're talking about DaVinci Resolve. We have Jay Lippman, YouTube tutorial extraordinaire, and Phil Holland joining us today, along with, of course, Matt Bach, our internal expert. I always like to start off, just in case anybody doesn't already know, give us a little bit of intro background of who you are and what you do. We'll start with you, Jay. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jay, and I'm a full-time content creator. I used to try to call myself a filmmaker, but that's not what I am. I don't make films. I make content for the internet, and I do a lot of it in DaVinci Resolve. I do some creative projects, but my bread and butter here on YouTube is DaVinci Resolve tutorials, and yeah, that's pretty much me. That sums me up.
All right, and Phil?
Yeah, I'm a director and cinematographer in Los Angeles, and probably relevant to this conversation, I'm a former colorist from Rhythm and Hue Studios. I've been doing digital color work since the 90s, which is unusual.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. I guess we'll just get right into it. I guess most folk would do a lot of video editing and stuff in Adobe products. There's Premiere Pro, After Effects, things like that. Well, I think those are really it. But Resolve has been growing. You hear a lot more people working with it and doing the whole workflow within it. I guess we'll just start off with, like, why do you think DaVinci Resolve is blowing up?
I'll let Jay start.
Okay.
I think there's a couple reasons for it, actually. One, because there's a free version, which means it's really good for people who are just getting into editing, you know, because I don't know about anybody else, but when I first started, I was looking to get into this. Like, first of all, I wasn't even getting into this to, like, make videos full time. My goal was to make a YouTube video to promote a life coaching business, and I just happened to fall in love with making videos and focused on that. But when I started, I was looking to make as little of an investment as possible, you know. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I didn't know about DaVinci Resolve back then, so I ended up with actually, I started off with Filmora, which was very, very reasonably priced. But, you know, I had a cell phone and all that. Now you got this free version that can do basically anything you need to do, especially if you're just working on YouTube. You know, it's got all the tools that you need. And I honestly think that's the biggest reason, is it has everything that you need and you can get it for free. And it doesn't take... Well, at least back then it didn't take, I don't know, I haven't looked at the numbers. Matt, you could probably chime in on this, but back when I started, it didn't take nearly as much computing power to run Resolve as it did to run the Adobe suite. So,
yeah, I totally agree with you. That one of the biggest reasons it's growing is that they have the free version, and that the paid version is very reasonable. I mean, the paid version, was it $295 or something, like $299? One of those. It's under $300 barely. And it's a one-time cost, and that's it. Versus like Adobe or a lot of others, they're all moving to subscription models where it's, you know, I think even like Premiere Pro, if you add it up, it's like $240 a year or something like that just for Premiere Pro. So that's close to the same price as DaVinci Resolve, but DaVinci Resolve is a one-time cost. Like, we're using in our dongles, I think they're for Resolve 14, I think. And like, they still work. They work fine. They work great. Like we've been able to upgrade every single time to the newer versions with no issues. So I think, yeah, the entry point being so low, I mean, free, so those always you can get. And then the continuation, you know, once you get up to the point where you need the higher resolution timelines or some of the open effects that are locked behind Studio or noise reduction, you know, the things that are really, you don't need as a newbie, are at a very reasonable price. Like $200, $300 is nothing as far as software goes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll even provide some of the historical relevance, I guess.
Yeah.
Resolve used to cost quite a bit of money. $40,000, $35,000, $25,000. It kept coming down, and then BMD acquired the company, and there was a lot of zigzagging on what they were going to do with the software. And notably, when they dropped the price down to $1,000, that was a big freaking deal, because everything else in the industry at that time was, I think, $35,000 and up. Most solutions at that level. Yeah, so it was a sent ripples, but the additional thing, besides there being a free version and an alarmingly affordable studio version, is the fact that they've had so much rapid and positive software development. They're constantly updating very quickly and adapting to any sort of codec revisions, code revisions, feature requests. This was 17 has a bunch of new features in it. Just seeing that sort of foot on the gas pedal sort of development. And I think most notably in the last several years, the two major ones was integrating the editing audio pipeline as well as integrating Fusion. So now you have this one piece of software that you can do quite a bit of your work in. There's a few things that are obviously things you might want to go to third-party apps, other apps to do vector graphics or 3D or whatever. But the fact that it's all in there for $300, I mean, that's a ridiculous deal. So.
Yeah, I think you're totally hitting it on the dot there. Like, and also even that cost for a lot of people, it's actually not even that cost for the studio version, because DaVinci Resolve Studio is included when you buy any Blackmagic camera. I'm pretty sure it's any of them. And also, like right now, there's almost no reason to buy just a license, because if you buy the speed editor, like their hardware speed editor thing, it's the same cost as a license, $295, but you get a free license. So like, why would you buy just a license?
I still actually buy the dongles, and it's because I travel abroad, and I have internet keys as well, or however they would call that activation. But sometimes I might be in the middle of nowhere where I might need to literally install Resolve on a new box because customs didn't clear a machine or something. Who knows? So I just try to prepare for everything I can when I do that type of work.
Yeah, I like the dongles too. Like we do a lot of hardware swaps and OS reinstalls and stuff, and having a dongle is nice. But I mean, for a lot of people, whatever, a software license key is easier than having something plugged into the machine. The other thing I wanted to touch on, you were talking about like codec support and stuff, and yeah, that's definitely a thing where Resolve is much better. I might even share a screen real quick. Tips, come on, here we go. Just because I want to show. There, okay. So this is some testing we did to see like what if I can get it. There we go. To like what versions of H.264 supports hardware decoding in Premiere Pro and then DaVinci Resolve. And it was really surprising. Like Premiere Pro only supports the most basic level of flavors of H.264.
That was loud.
Whoa, what was that? Whereas Resolve, like especially like it all depends on what the hardware support is, but it seems like Resolve, if there's hardware support, they have software support.
Cool.
So like this whole thing over here, that's like it's all green check marks versus Premiere. It's like there's like two. So when you talk about codec support, I definitely agree that DaVinci Resolve is further along than Premiere Pro as well.
You can do more than that in Premiere now. If I'm not mistaken.
In the beta, they've added support for 10-bit 422 with Intel CPUs, but that's it. Like it is, it's bare bones. Yeah,
I think that's actually been. I don't even think it's totally summarized under color management, but Resolve's also really helped with HDR workflows. I know a lot of people aren't doing that yet, but when I started doing HDR, it was like the hardest thing in the world to do. And they've also stepped on the gas to make a very robust tool set with the correct file tagging, and that's been pretty important for a lot of people who have to finish for HDR and SDR masters. And where Premiere Premiere struggles because it's an NLE first, and they need to integrate more color features into Premiere. And there's been some really big advancements recently. The tetrahedral LUT interpolation thing we talked about a little bit before, I think is huge, because now you have basically, no matter what software you're using, Resolve or anything, in the color management tab in Resolve, you can turn on trilinear or tetrahedral LUT interpolation. Always set it to tetrahedral. I've shown nothing but examples of why LUTs and LUT workflows and even some of the output transforms from various camera companies on log footage require that sort of interpolation, because you'll have slightly noisier footage. You will have slightly, maybe even artifacts in your footage. So tetrahedral will solve that like 99.9% of the time and make your image quality slightly better. And it's been one of the least talked about things because I don't think it's a sexy concept at all. It's not how you get your teal orange cinematic color grade. It's it's like, hey, this will actually make your footage look a little bit better.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, because you mentioned that before the stream, and I was like, again, one of these things. I was like, I recognize those words individually, but like,
yeah,
together.
I mean, to give a real summary of it, you generally have three types of LUT interpolation. Trilinear is the basic sort of, meat factory version. Tetrahedral is a little bit more complicated, and then you have tricubic, which is a bit more processor heavy. And you'll see that actually supported in a lot of visual effects programs like Nuke and such. But and actually Photoshop is tricubic, if I'm not mistaken. But for our purposes in the motion picture industry, I think it's the baseline thing that we need to use on all software that supports any type of setting regarding this.
So I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you guys. And Phil, this first one, you might have more of an input than Jay, but Jay, I'm also interested in your thoughts. How important is it for the fact that Resolve has so much, I don't know if this is the right term, but like hardware support, like they have like their color panels and their speed editors and all that kind of stuff. Like with your background in color, I'm guessing that you view that as being a big pro for Resolve. Whereas I think, are there things for Premiere for using like physical hardware things that does that exist for Premiere? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, you can get control panels and such, but the integration that BMD has with Resolve and their panels is, you can't really touch that. If you are determined to be a professional colorist and that is what you're doing day in and day out, that gives you sort of the Ferrari experience. And that's a huge thing. There's other companies that make panels as well, but we're talking about significantly higher investments in both the software and the hardware at that point. But Resolve's integration with their panels is great, and they make different solutions at different price points. I think it's useful. I've moved away from using panels like a long time ago, and it's more due to I find myself working abroad. I find myself working in different studios. So being able to approach the software with a mindset that I don't care what I'm using when I interface with the software has become rather important. That said, I miss some of the sensitivity features that you can have, with wheels and balls and whatnot. So, and obviously you can play it like an organ. You can get really fast at doing things on the panels. That said, you can also get really fast at doing it any other way too. It's just a matter of changing how you work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I kind of got to echo what you said, Phil. I think they can definitely be helpful, but I think they're definitely more helpful in the capacity of if you're a specialist, like if you're a colorist or if you're, just in audio. Because if you get panels for everything, I mean, your desk is going to be the size of your entire room. It's just not practical, and that's kind of why. Yeah, it'll look great. Make great Instagram content, but it's just not practical, So I got a couple things. The only Blackmagic design thing that I have is the Ada Mini that I use for live streaming. I would love to get my hands on the speed editor. Don't get me wrong. I think small stuff like that is great. but like anything external that I had, like I've got a Tor box where I can map keyboard shortcuts, and that's basically the extent of what I do. And I've got a Wacom tablet, which makes color grading a lot easier than with a mouse. But other than that, it's just not practical if you're doing everything.
Yeah, I have the same Wacom setup, probably. I actually do it for storyboarding and concept art as well, but I occasionally will use it in Resolve. I think, the general advice I have for filmmakers or even aspiring colorists, the order of operation you should probably explore is investing in Resolve, investing in the studio license. It's literally not that much money at all when it comes down to it. The next step up from there, you need to start thinking about monitors and calibration and how you're getting a signal to those monitors. And that's where your next big money needs to be spent. It's, the balls and the controls and stuff, that's great, but that's all about how you're driving the car. You need you need something that you can actually see and have a very good, accurate representation of what you're doing. And that's a whole other conversation, because monitors are, riddled with variety. There's the conversations between OLED and non-OLED panels, IPS or whatever. And obviously,
and you need something like a deck link to give an unbiased signal, out to.
You can now actually monitor out
things
through Resolve through a second GPU.
But it still goes through the drivers, so you still technically color purists will tell you that it's
And there's some bit issues and stuff. Yeah.
But if you're just going onto YouTube or something, like it's not as important, I feel, as if you're doing something for film. But
three of my 5 workstations that I use Resolve with have BMD cards in them. The other 2 I go out through the GPU, and it's just because my primary box has a card in it. That's just what is needed. But that box also goes out to 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 displays if I wanted to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what else? I'm curious. So we talked about like the all-in-app, one-app workflow is really nice. We mentioned how like amazing it is for color. Like Resolve is like the color like software out there. So anything
like that was their thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But where else do you guys think that Resolve like excels? I suppose like where is it really strong compared to Premiere Pro? Do you have any? Like this is kind of put on the spot.
Well, I think in terms of hardware, the fact that it taps into that second GPU,
absolutely.
You can have a dedicated GPU for your GUI. They obviously promote that workflow. You still need a big boy GPU if you're doing 8K multi-layer stuff or a bunch of noise reduction or whatever. But a big boy GPU is not what it used to cost. It's you can get a lot done. My general rule of thumb is if you're doing anything professionally with any camera system is you want about as many gigabytes on your GPU as your K on your camera. That's generally a nice rule of thumb. And anything you can go over that is actually even better. So if you have a 4K camera, a 4 gigabyte GPU is great, but an 8 gigabyte one will do you better. And I deal with complicated projects and array projects where we sometimes have 32K resolution and we split things up into tiles and it's just a pain in the butt. But, there are some demands to doing that type of workflow. And everything you're doing at that point is trying to actually cater to the end project and how it's going to be delivered and adapt to that as much as you can. So, what else can I say about Resolve? The bin system's really clean.
Yes, love the bins.
Yeah,
love the bins.
It's really great. I mean, it's not unfamiliar if you've used Avid, Final Cut, Premiere. All this stuff is in there. I like how it's actually divided up in Resolve. The media pool stuff's pretty sexy, in my opinion. It's really simple to get a bunch of clips in there. You're ingesting a large quantity of footage. All of these programs have a moment of like Zen where it's like, please don't crash.
Get that spinning blue wheel. Please.
Yeah. I mean, it just depends. Like I have a color test bed that I have open in Resolve right now that has close to 6 hours of clips in it. And this is footage from all types of cameras. And I use this test bed. It's one of my test beds that I use to develop looks for multiple cameras. And it's just a project that takes a moment to open. It's just, it just got to load everything. But once I'm in there, I'm dancing between all those clips. I have critical time markers where I have my skin tone layout. I have my nature stuff, which usually has greenery or blues. I have my sunset stuff. I have footage from all over the world, like Japan, New Zealand, Europe, to show different types of daylight, because daylight's actually different colors in different places. So this test bed is actually critical for me when I do look development. And it's probably the biggest project I ever have to deal with, because it's probably the length of 3 feature films.
Yeah. But do you use I guess it's not really new anymore, but the cut page with the whole timeline thing where it puts all of your clips in one row? Do you use that much? Like, that's one of the ones that, like, I've seen. I'm like, oh, that'd be cool, but like I never use it. But
I'll let Jay talk.
I do. Yeah, I do. Not for the main edit, but there's a couple tools in there that are, I actually just put out a video about this a few weeks ago, that I think are crucial for YouTubers who are kind of, especially focused on audience retention and not boring the audience, not getting them to click off your video twice. They've got 2 tools in there, the boring detector and the close-up tool. And you can literally set it up so, data shows that, typical YouTube audience attention span's about 6 seconds, right? So you turn on the tool and you just put every 6, after 6 seconds, this cut is boring, and it'll show you where your cuts are boring, and you can go through there. And if you don't have B-roll to put in, then you put your cursor where you need to put it. You press the close-up tool, and it'll do a second layer. It'll add another video track and do a close-up. It'll punch in, like, I don't know, I think it's like something like 12% or something, just to get that quick little punch in. So I use it for that all the time. I use it for multicam because I think sync bin is just way better than multicam in the edit page. And but that's about it. I use those 3 I use those 3 tools in the cut page. Everything else I do in edit.
Wow.
Well, some of that I'm sure is just, that's what we're used to. Like, we're used to those edit pages, or someone new coming in, they might use it more. But
could we say what tools again?
I think we're talking about the cut page in DaVinci Resolve, and I was just mentioning specifically the boring detector, which literally tells you when your videos are boring. I love that. The close-up tool, which will just add a second video track and give you a close-up of whatever shot you're on right there. And also sync bin, which is a way to do multicam in the cut page.
Cool. Thank you.
Something else that we haven't really touched on that I really like in Resolve myself is how fast the tracking is. Like planar trackers and all that kind of stuff. Like if you got to track a mask, or what is it called in Resolve? Magic mask? Is that it?
Magic mask. Right. Yep.
Yeah. Like all of that tracking stuff is so fast. Because I mean, to be honest, like I learned actually a lot of the video area on Adobe first. So I was used to tracking stuff in After Effects, and it tracks it's like frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and then I got into Resolve, and it was doing like a planar tracker, and it is so fast. It is just
that's been an area that they've excelled for so long, and in tandem with full resolution playback, it's sort of a hard combination to beat comparatively with other software packages. So, if you have a subject moving through a frame and you need to brighten up exposure on her face or something like that, that track doesn't take a long time. In fact, it happens more often in real time on my system. So it just plays through, and you double check everything. You may have to add a couple keyframes if something gets a little bit screwy, but that's something that Resolve's had the corner on in terms of that performance for a long time.
And it goes into like Fusion too. Like you can do the exact same tracking if you're doing like motion graphics. Like you want a title to follow something. Yep, it's instant. You don't have to wait on it.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think that was probably one of the reasons I think BMD even got interested in Resolve, was that motion tracker. Because they did have, I mean, if you go back to the days of combustion and things like that, because Combustion actually had a decent one, but it's no longer around really for our purposes. And that was purely a VFX only program. It was a competition for Fusion and Nuke. But yeah, the fact that you have it now fully in a grading software, where track mats and things like that used to be compositor fix stuff at VFX houses. Now having it in the grading software is huge. In fact, even in the Adobe world, you used to send the footage over to After Effects before they actually had Lumetri and the fact that you could have the masks and things and tracking that way. So it's interesting. That's all happened just in the last few years, really. The evolution of that, certainly in the last decade.
I know, Houston, you're probably itching to get some of those questions that are in the chat, but one more thing real quick I wanted to ask you guys about, because we were talking about like masks and doing colors and stuff. I know one of the areas that I had a hard time with Resolve was the node structure rather than layers. And that's true in the color panel, and that's in Fusion especially. Like the color, I kind of got, I just kind of thought of it like layers, just formatted differently. But Fusion was where like I found myself having to do like weird loops of things were going in weird directions. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, or like recommendations to people who are thinking about getting into Resolve, like how to think about the node system?
Node systems are an interesting concept for anyone working in the visual effects industry. If you have made shaders or things like that, it's par for the course. So Fusion will represent the hardest that you have to deal with, because you could be piping in different elements to get an end result. But in terms of the color grading node structure, not too bad. It's weird. I used to, long ago, I used to refer to them as chains, chain links. But the problem is you can have node bundles and things where certain things are on top of each other. In which case, if you have any familiarity with a layer mindset, it's just a little bit backwards in Resolve, where your forefront layer might be on the bottom, like on a splitter node or something like that. It's not that bad. I mean, I think once you get familiar with it, but if you're doing complicated composites and stuff in Fusion, it can get hairy. If you're adding particle effects, you can do all sorts of weird stuff. I saw a 3D motion layout that just blew my mind the other day. The node structure was just a hairy mess, but it made sense once I looked at it. But, obviously somebody spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I think the node structure, especially in the color page, I got it pretty quickly because I was able to look at, okay, it's just like layers, it was pretty easy. Fusion threw me for a loop for a long time, and I'm still not, that great at it. I'm not a big, effects guy. But the best way that I found to think of it is actually, Phil, you kind of accidentally alluded to it. It's a pipeline. You got your media in, which is your source, and then you got your media out, which is the end of the line, and everything is in between that. And honestly, the best way to learn it, like people who are just getting into Resolve now have it easiest, because with DaVinci Resolve 17, you got all these pre-built templates in the effects library in Fusion, and all you got to do is just drag one in there. You can see all the nodes, and you can start seeing what each one does and looking at the structure. And it's it made it a lot easier to start.
Yeah, that's a great way to learn
Fusion,
is deconstructing some of those presets, just so you can understand, like, oh, this is how they're doing this. So if you want to make something on your own that's moving the text a certain way, without being super familiar with how to, move something from A to B. And there's actually additional, I don't know how many people do some heavy image processing work here, but you can do some pretty gnarly, cool stuff inside Fusion that is a little bit more technical. But the ability to have that inside a grading application is also very powerful. And in terms of the node tree, Jay, you do tutorials. I think one of my favorite, I kind of spy on the people who do color grading tutorials, on YouTube. And I like to see what people have for their node trees, what they think their best practices are, just everyone's different ways of working. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that to a level I probably should not enjoy it. I see some people building out node trees and I'm going, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work for trying to get, certain things solved. But the general mindset of having a color correction and then separate color grading world is the right mindset. A lot of people separate color balance and exposure into two different nodes, hopefully still fairly early on in their node tree so that they're not setting themselves up for a complicated revision. For those who are not familiar with Resolve or anything color grading related, the general best practice when it comes to manipulating your footage is you have a color correction process. And if you have a bunch of different shots from the same scene, like if we have Jay walking through his house and, everything that happens in this particular room is probably going to share the same lighting, but we'll have different camera angles. And a good DP, there might not be too much exposure or color variation, but just because of how the way light works, there might be a little bit of exposure balance, or maybe he gets a little bit closer to one of the walls and there's a little bit more warmth in his face. There's where a color correction can come in. So what you want to do is get all of your shots in a sequence color corrected before you think about a stylized color grade. And those are two different processes, really, when it comes down to it. It's the what's correct, and then now where do we take it to get to what we intend it to look like.
And that color correction can oftentimes be the more difficult part.
Yeah.
Because once you have it all looking the same, getting that creative looks a little bit easier. But man, I worked on a project once. I was working on a TV show that never saw the light of day. But I was the editor, and I was going through and I was grading, and I was going through the color correction. And man, some of those shots, everything was shot on a Canon SL2, which is, I didn't film it. I just happened to have that camera. It's a discontinued, camera that was $600 brand new. And some of those shots were just so oversaturated. The exposure was set to auto in a couple shots. It was bad. It was really bad. And that color correction process just took me forever. Once I got it though, the actual grade was easy.
Yeah.
Because if it all looks the same, you can just add a grade to everything and just tweak it a little bit, on shot to shot.
You gotta normalize it all first.
Learn how to group your clips in DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah.
Well, because you can do in Resolve, in the color page, you can do edits to a specific clip, or you can apply it to groups or all. I remember there was one project a customer sent me before I knew that you could apply grades to all. And I was like, why does this look different? Like I pull everything off and it looks different than the source. And it was because they had I forget what the name is for it, the term for it. But yeah, they had something applied to like all of their footage.
Yeah. It's not uncommon for an output transform to be, the last step in the chain, which you'll apply to all. And anything you do in that group will be, obviously to all of the footage, which is a nice way to imbue just a look if you have a nice baseline. Like if I was doing a cooking show all on one set, there's a lot you could do at the end of the pipe to influence everything once it's all color corrected and balanced. And it would be a very fast way of working. And a lot of people are discovering sort of the mindset of grading below your output transforms. I think that's been, I think for some people has been sort of a revolutionary concept and sometimes hard to digest because a lot of people were just grading on top of Rec 709, which is cool. You can do that as well. But there's lots of different ways of working nowadays. And at least from my perspective, I have a film background and gosh, I don't know. I think I've shot one project in a non-RAW format in the last 10 years. So I've been a very big vocal advocate of actually a pure RAW workflow. So I try to have all of my footage. I don't like transcoding. I understand that some people just need ProRes or something for fast turnarounds and stuff like that. But if I'm shooting with cameras that can create a compelling, high-quality RAW image, I love being able to tap into the SDKs, set my red code RAW settings, my area RAW settings, whoever. just to always have that live, that non-destructive copy just there in case you want to do a white balance tweak and tap into the SDK rather than Resolve to do some of those corrections. Little nerdy, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's neat that that's an option. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow. I'd like to touch on some of we've had a few questions come through from the audience. We'll just kind of start with the early one. Apollo Apostolos from YouTube. He asks, Blackmagic makes a custom CentOS, I think, to run DaVinci Resolve. Do y'all have experience with Resolve on Ubuntu?
Not me in particular. I've seen it running on it, but I don't have any of my systems here doing it. Linux.
I can talk a little bit.
Yeah, in the VFX world. So
Linux is what?
Common in the visual effects world. So I mean, I'm sure Matt's
Yeah, I can weigh in on this a little bit. So yeah, definitely on the upper end especially, I think Linux is very common because you can lock it down a whole lot more than Windows or Mac OS. Like they all want to apply updates and all that kind of junk. And whereas Linux, you can lock it down. This is what it is. Great. It's a lightweight OS. You don't have to deal with as much stuff. The downside to it is, it takes a whole heck of a lot more setup and work because like you mentioned, they have a custom CentOS build, and that is true, but CentOS is actually changing. There's a big uproar in the Linux community because they're I forget what they're doing, but it's basically a bunch of things that's going to make it not the OS that it is today. CentOS used to be amazing, and now they basically have killed it essentially. So a lot of people are starting to move to like Ubuntu, but Ubuntu is not an officially certified OS for Blackmagic, and so people are having to find all these workarounds and all these hacks. I know like audio is a common issue on Linux. So like once you get it dialed in and you've got it working, from what I understand, it is just like going to be amazingly stable, but it can take a lot of work to get to that point. And you're not going to want to like update your versions of Resolve nearly as often because it could turn into a 2-week process of fiddling with, Linux and drivers and trying to get it to work. So if you need to lock down, I think it's amazing. If you want to be nimble and be able to update and upgrade and you use new hardware and software and all that, it's probably not the way you want to go.
No. So, and earlier when we were talking about the controller thingies, a Great Tower on Twitch, he was wondering what's your preferences in user control, referencing the ball controller.
I think most of us are just mouse keyboard, right?
Mouse keyboard. I think a Wacom is very useful if you include that because that gives you some of that granularity that you can get from a ball or a dial. But if you're considering the full-blown panel system for Resolve, there's a financial and space requirement with that. Those are interesting choices, and I don't know. I mean, you can technically work faster with a full board setup, but I really only recommend that if that's like your full-time job, really, or even your part-time job as a colorist or something. However you would identify that. I deal with color all year long, and I made a very active choice to just get rid of that because it was becoming a frustration in my life because I was being put into situations where I did not have my boards. That's just what it was. Yeah.
Jay, I think you're muted.
Somehow. Oh no.
I am muted. There's a button for that. Yeah, keyboard, mouse, Wacom tablet, and also I can unplug it. Torbox. This thing is great. You can map keyboard shortcuts to all these little buttons and switches, and once you actually get used to it, you can fly around this thing, and it actually made my workflow a lot faster. So if you're gonna get any controllers, I would get something like this where you can custom map. Especially if you're doing everything. If you're doing the editing and the coloring and the audio, get something that you can map custom shortcuts to if you want to get something to make your workflow faster. Other than that, keyboard and mouse are just fine.
One of those gaming mice that has like 20 buttons on it.
No, you goof. I just saw a thread on Twitter. It was like Thursday or Friday last. They were going over like, keyboard commands to make things faster. And somebody had chimed in and said, I have like half a dozen of those same keyboard commands mapped to buttons on my mouse, and I don't ever have to take my hand off my mouse. it makes things so much easier. Cut, move, thing, or I can't remember exactly, but there's like 5 or 6 different keyboard macros essentially tagged to the buttons on his mouse, and it's like revolutionized his workflow.
I have a mouse preference, and I own several of them, and I gave Razer a whole bag of money at some point. Because even when I travel with my laptops and things like that, I still use a full-size mouse. So all of my keyboard shortcuts, or key shortcuts, I should say, that go on that mouse, and it's not like 24 keys or anything like that. It has just an up, down arrow, middle mouse click, all that stuff. All of that's consistent across my systems. The one thing I would say to that user or viewer, more than anything, get really familiar with the keyboard shortcuts. If you're going to be doing editing inside any of these programs, that will save you more time than anything. And you've probably seen keyboards you can buy with color-coded keys. And what's nice about Resolve is you can actually customize your key setup. I have a knack for software, so I've never gone through this. But if you're more familiar working with Premiere, you can set your keys up in such a way that it doesn't feel unfamiliar to you when you're in Resolve, which I know was actually a wall that a lot of people hit. Were like, I don't even know where the cut key is. Wait, what am I pushing? And
yeah,
there's actually
an option when you install it. It asks.
There's there's presets for that in the DaVinci Resolve. There's presets for Final Cut and for Avid and for Premiere Pro. So if you are switching over, you can just click the preset on your default keyboard shortcuts for whatever you just moved from. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And one just to get I guess DC Chavez on YouTube asks, is Resolve using the GPU across all of the workspaces, or does Fusion lean more on the CPU?
So
I can answer.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Matt. Yeah, no, you got
no, you go first.
So in the settings, your GUI you set up to go through one GPU. Then your processing and rendering will happen through the additional GPU. When you see real-time previews, as far as I know, well, I can't say I know every aspect of everything that happens in Resolve or Fusion. So maybe Matt has some nuggets there, but the second GPU is mostly for rendering, as far as I know.
Yeah, so no, I think you mostly got it right. Yeah. You can, like Phil was saying, you can define one GPU for nothing but your UI and one for processing. I think actually these days that's not as critical. I think that was more critical before we had as powerful a GPUs we have now. I think now mostly you can just use both and it should be fine. Unless you're using a dedicated like low-end card, then yeah, go for it. The weird thing is with Fusion, I think. So the edit page, the color page, whatever you're doing in there, it will scale with more GPUs. It just depends on what effects you're doing. Like if you're doing noise reduction, it's going to be mostly your GPU. If you're just like processing footage like ProRes or even Red, depending on what your settings are for debarring and decoding, could actually be even more CPU limited than GPU. Just depends on your hardware. Fusion, again, is the weird one. One, I believe it's pretty much single threaded. So it's only going to use one core on your CPU, whereas Resolve, the rest of it can use quite a bit more. Two, GPU performance is funky in the Fusion tab. One, I believe it only technically uses one GPU unless you're doing some of the things that it's pulling in from the other panels like noise reduction. Two, performance can actually get worse if you have more GPUs in Fusion. It's some weird, because Blackmagic bought Fusion and then they're porting it in. I bet it's some like legacy code where like they didn't have support for multi GPUs and then Blackmagic added it in. So if you have just like one or two GPUs, I wouldn't worry about it. But technically, if you have 3 or 4 GPUs, I forget what the numbers was, but you can see a small performance drop in Fusion if you have more GPUs enabled. I don't think it's enough that you really have to worry about it unless you are spending all of your time in Fusion. If you're going to spend a day in Fusion, yeah, you might go into your preferences and turn off the third GPU so that you don't see that 10% performance hit or whatever. But for most people, 10% is like whatever. But so Fusion is definitely the weird one, I think.
I think while we're on that question, since we're talking about GPUs, and the question for Matt is, I definitely have talked to Puget about the diminishing returns of, having more and more GPUs to throw at something. Resolve really likes to have 2, but the question is there an advantage to having 3 or 4? What's your take on that?
It is definitely diminishing returns. I'd have to look up some numbers, but I think it's like every GPU you add increases performance by like 50% or something. That's probably not exactly right. So 1 to 2 is a 50% performance bump. 2 to 3 would be 175% versus one GPU. So like it does flatline off. And actually, a lot of the systems we were doing were only 3 GPUs. We rarely went up to 4 because you have to be like, all you're doing is noise reduction. And it's like, okay, then you go up. Plus, once you get above 3, it's hard to have 3 GPUs plus like a Blackmagic card. And usually the people who are at that level need the like, highly color accurate output. Also right now, I think 2 GPUs even is a problem sometimes in sort of power draw and thermals, and 3 is like the most we can do, like period. Just because GPUs are so heavy on power draw. Yeah, you'd be blowing circuits in your house or your office if you had 4. Yep. So yeah, I think most people in Resolve, like if you're just starting, you can get away with 1 GPU. And I think having 1 GPU that has enough VRAM is way more important than anything. So if you run out of VRAM, you're screwed. So I think most people go up to like a 3080 or a 3080 Ti, and then they add like a second one. But I'm trying to think. I think most people would be best served with 2 until you're at the point where time is money, and like, yeah, making a $10,000 investment like pays for itself in a month or 2 months or whatever. It's a finite return on your investment.
Yeah, I think that's really the divide, where the multiple GPU, generally speaking, I recommend having 2 GPUs or one crazy big one if you're dealing with, raw footage from any of these cameras. If you're dealing with 3D rendering or simulation or things like that, a lot of those programs are optimized differently. You can tap into different cores, different amounts of GPUs. That's something you have to look at. But generally speaking, I don't recommend more than 2 GPUs for a decent system, especially if you're going to also have an I/O card. I don't know if Puget's gotten into making systems with dual PSUs yet, but
we used to. It's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. I don't do that anymore, thankfully. And I'm just happier to have a simpler world, honestly, when it comes to that stuff.
Well, in power supplies these days, you can get big enough ones where we're not limited by the wattage on the PSU, where we're limited pretty much by the electrical circuits that most people have.
Right.
And especially once you add in your monitors and stuff are usually on the same circuit, like it just doesn't make much sense. The other thing I will mention on GPU, because some people, when they're getting into it, they'll find these things. People will hear about like SLI and NVLink. Technically, Resolve supports NVLink. In all of our testing, it does absolutely nothing. So
same.
Don't worry about it. Like there's official support for it. You can it'll actually say like NVLink enabled or something like that in preferences. As far as we can tell, it does nothing for performance.
Yeah.
So
Leela from YouTube was wondering. Sorry, there was kind of a goof back and forth in the chat about referencing her full screen name, but so Leela from YouTube. What do you wish to see in DaVinci Resolve?
Ooh,
that's a good question.
Oh man, I honestly would like a little bit more attention paid to Fairlight down the road. I think so. I got, just for background, I got my start in audio. I'm a lifelong musician. I started in recording studios, so. There are certain things. There's a couple tools that I really like. I'm going to say it, from Adobe Audition, that I wish would get added to Fairlight, like the leveling tool. I absolutely love the leveling tool, because you talk to a camera, especially in a talking head scenario, on a long enough timeline, you're going to get a lot of fluctuation in volume. That leveling tool can help balance it out. You can do it with compressors, but sometimes it ends up sounding weird. I think some of the tools just need to kind of be revamped. I'm not a huge fan of their noise reduction tool, audio noise reduction. Huge fan of color noise reduction. Not so much the audio noise reduction. You get it's just too easy to get those dreaded warbles. I actually prefer, I do most of my audio cleanup using Isotope's RX editor. I bounce everything over to there and do that. I just think that it just needs a little bit more tweaking. I'd like a little bit more attention to be paid for that. As far as features, honestly, it's got almost everything I need. I haven't really had to like download an external plugin for something I need. I've downloaded them for stuff that I thought was cool and that I would like, you know, maybe have some fun with, like motion graphics plugins and stuff like that. But it's got everything you need. I just would like some of the older tools to maybe get revamped and updated and work a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Wow. So I will reach out to them frequently when I have feature requests. And often it's, you know, replying to a bug or something that a new feature had or something like that. But on my big wants, I want a more robust curve tool set when plotting points on curves. That's a big one for me. I still deal with 16-bit workflows as well. So there's some stuff tied to that. That's a whole other process. But yeah, just something a little bit more robust for curves. I use other pieces of software that have some additional features where you can kind of fine-tune the Bezier, know where they are in three-dimensional space or two-dimensional space, I should say. Like right now, Resolve, you just are putting something down without much of a knowledge of where it is. And literally in a 16-bit space, I might be doing something between a half code value that actually has a difference. This is hard nerd stuff, but you know, for people who are developing actual looks that people use on a studio level, it's important to have a little bit more nuance. There's a hue shift thing I keep coming across that I've reported, but I don't know what happens. It's pertaining to something happening in the color engine. Editing wise, editing's been really nice. Setting my ins and outs. I think on the timeline in the color page, some additional scene grouping would be cool. In the film industry, shot sequences are usually called like TL 301 through, 372, and I feel like there's some finessing that could be done there, because when you have a client coming to you and it's like, okay, now let's talk about the TL sequence, you can bring that up and show that to them. I think there's probably a couple of new ways to probably do that haven't been implemented yet. That's more professional colorists, like, okay, now we have to deal with this today, and then let's go back to Scooby-Doo at the bar or something like that, that other sequence. Just navigating quickly like that, because when you have 3,300 shots or something, it's just, it's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
There was a curve that I wish, I don't remember what it was, because it came up like 2 weeks ago when I was working on something, and I was like, man, I wish there was a curve for it. Would be one of the versus curves, so like hue versus hue versus. Now, to DaVinci Resolve's credit, nobody has this curve, and it just popped into my head that I was like, man, this would be really nice to have, and I just can't remember it for the life of me. But come back to me. I'll make a video on it when I remember what it is. But there was a versus curve that it didn't have. At first, I thought it was like saturation versus luma, but we have that. So I don't know, and I don't know what the point of saying all that was either. So carry on.
Finessing more values actually on lift gamma gain as well as everywhere else. Having more than 2 decimal points would be a big deal for me. The reason why I say that, coming from a film background and dealing with certain things, and you can copy paste, and I think behind the scenes it does it, even though what you see on screen, it's actually rounding up or down depending on where you are. But if you're dealing with things like 1/8 of a stop correction, which is a thing, you'd like to be able to slap down those 4 decimal points or, behind the decimal there. So that's just they could literally have a feature where that gets expanded. I wouldn't be mad about that. Also the same for the RGB mixer. A lot of people are getting interested in doing their own color matrices and things like that. The mixer is not a perfect translation to that sort of concept, but is useful in that way. So I think there's room for improvement there.
Yeah, not nearly as nerdy as your stuff, Phil. But the thing that I would like, I just want to be able to rearrange my workspace. Like, I think that's one thing that Adobe does really well is like you can pop out windows and move them to another monitor. You can rearrange everything wherever you want. You can save workspaces, whereas Resolve is a lot more locked down. Like, you can resize things, you can drag things, the borders, but you can't like move things. And especially myself, like I love having lots of monitors. Like I have 3 monitors here. Like I love to move things around in different places. And the most you can do with Resolve is you can just have your video preview be on a second monitor. So that's my little.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely something to be said. And there's actually 2 different style of GUI panels in there, which is a little bit weird, but they now have full screen playback, which I can't remember when that was added, but it was added fairly recently. Yeah. I like that moment where I'm working on something, even though I have it, going out as a clean feed elsewhere, where I can just put it full screen, because my main grading display is an OLED, and it's just nice for me to really see the black levels on that particular display. And then I have 2 right now. My setup is OLED and IPS. Both are high-end calibrated displays. And then when I'm actually mastering projects, I usually go out to multiple different displays just to see, does it look good on a variety of TVs? Does it look good on certain tablets, certain phones, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat said want more customization on dual screen mode. I can actually agree with that. I can agree. Because I often, especially if I'm working with like multiple video tracks, I'll have dual screen on, but I'll have it in full screen timeline mode so I can see all my tracks at the same time. But it's got the timeline on monitor 1 and everything else on I really wish I could switch that without actually having to switch which one was my primary monitor. I don't know why. It's just very uncomfortable for me to... I don't know why. It's a mental thing, but I don't have the option to do that. So
a quick toggle sort of situation.
Yeah.
Or just be able to drag it around. It really is an area where I think Adobe is well in front, is UI customization.
I sometimes like using a dedicated display with a 3 monitor setup for just my scopes. I don't know if anyone else does that here, but I find that is also really useful just to have that full screen. I think there's some concepts that could be tied to there. I think there's some cleaning up that could be done on the scopes as well, just graphically. But I use them judiciously to do all sorts of things, even exceeding color correction to look development. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to say, though, that, like, that's my nitpick, but I think their layouts that they use are pretty good anyway. So, like, I feel like it's a nitpick rather than a, like, I won't use Resolve because I can't drag this window over there.
So. Oh, yeah. No, I think it's fine. I just think there's some improvements in terms of how stuff is drawn, especially now that GPUs are a little bit bigger. I think we can get a little bit more of a cleaner, like, waveform. Just a hunch. I mean, I could be wrong. I know other companies that have different types of displays. I even think the CIE plot's not exactly 100% accurate, but that's just me, because it looks sometimes wrong. Yeah.
And it looks like Jim Robinson says there's a menu. It's on the menu. You can toggle the displays, Jay.
Interesting. I haven't seen that. I know I can switch which one is my primary display. The problem is it's only in the edit page where I have that problem. The dual screen layout in every other page I'm fine with. So I don't want to have to...
You don't want to be switching.
Yeah.
And then I think this will be a perfect one to wrap up because we're just a little bit toward the end of our hour. Deddy on Twitch asks, what would a sales pitch be for people to use Resolve versus you always hear people on Adobe or Sony Vegas or Final Cut Pro or whatever?
Ooh.
I mean, we kind of went over that at the beginning of this stream, right? I mean, you're talking about 2 different things here, though. You're talking about Premiere Pro and Sony Vegas, and those are 2 very different, softwares. I worked extensively in Premiere Pro for a while, and then I and I've done a few reviews on a couple different versions of Sony Vegas, and they're totally different software. Premiere Pro is high level. You're going to be editing films with this. It's got all the tools to help you do that. Vegas is made for content creators, people like me, but I'm a perfectionist. So, I would say one, it's free to try. So there's no reason why you shouldn't at least give it a go. But the fact is, I don't think there is a sales pitch. I don't believe that there is such thing as the best software. There's only the best for you. And the fact that DaVinci Resolve has a free version that you can try, download it, try it out. And if you like it better than what you're using now, you got yourself a free new piece of software that you like better than the one you had before. And if you need more tools, it's a fairly cheap upgrade and you don't have to pay for it ever again. That's my thing.
Yeah, I'm a little bit weird. I have to use all different sorts of software. So if someone sits me down in front of Avid, I could probably get work done.
Cool.
If I'm on a Mac, PC, or a Linux box, I can get work done. And I think from a broader scope and mindset, I think having a familiarity with the tools is very useful. That said, when you start looking at the strengths and weaknesses of each software package, it's going to allude to what you should be using. Resolve is a very robust color package, which has a very streamlined editing setup with some really decent audio controls. Jay mentioned that there's more you can do in Audition. Same, you can do more in Pro Tools. So there's definitely work that can be done there. If you're finding yourself dealing with audio heavy workflows, those are considerations. And I do a lot of round tripping outside of Resolve when I'm dealing with audio or graphics or things like that. So round tripping is still a thing in my world. The thing that Resolve allows me to do is edit and do color all in the same package with a little bit of compositing and visual effects if I need to do stuff like that. So that's super cool. If you're talking about things like Sony Vegas, really good for editing. I don't think it has the most robust color tool set at all. Same thing for Avid. It's a Meat Factory editor, and Premiere has the Meat Factory editor with a color engine, and that's where Premiere kind of fits in. And there are different strategies for color grading the material as well. So you have to just kind of think about those mindsets when you're looking at it. I would also implore you to look at what professionals are using. And I'm not saying you should do everything that professionals do, but if you notice that an entire film industry is using, the majority of it's using this software or this software, you should probably learn how to use something that everyone else is using if you want to be hireable and gain some proficiency. And it's the same for a lot of aspects of professional industries.
Yeah. Yep. The other thing I'd add on, as far as like a sales pitch, I'll go a little more sales pitchy than I think Jay went. So first of all, the fact that, like Jay was saying, is
I don't like
free.
sales.
No, me either. Well, I'm not selling anything, so I can do this. But also, I think one of the big things with Resolve is that it is I don't really want to call it a jack of all trades, but you can do almost anything you need to in one app up to a certain level. So like Jay was talking about, like, audio, you can go a certain level in Fairlight, then you have to go out to Audition. I'd say the same thing in Fusion. You can do a lot of stuff in Fusion, but at a certain point, like After Effects is probably going to be a better fit. That's the thing I really like about Resolve, is that you can stay in one spot and you can do most of the stuff you need to do up until you're a certain level of professional. But like if you're like a hobbyist, or you are you're not doing super complicated stuff, I personally really like the fact that it's all in one spot. It's one timeline, it's one project file. There's no like having to handle project files across multiple applications. So that's what I really like about it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. That does bring us a few minutes over our hour, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me today for our live stream extravaganza part 2, day 1, part 2. This has been great. I learned every time we do a stream, I learn a lot. But you guys really went way beyond my expectation. This was amazing. Thank you guys so much for this. So yeah, and I always like to thank the audience as well for joining us. We have a whole week's worth of content going out this week. Tomorrow's only one stream, Wednesday's 2, 1, 2 for the rest of this week. So definitely keep an eye out on our YouTube. And before we finally go, is there anything else that Jay or Phil would you like to shout out or tell anybody? Anything you'd want to wrap up before we go?
I just put out a video this morning. Go watch it, please.
No,
Smash that like button.
Stuff. Like Jay's got a really great channel with a lot of Resolve tutorials. So if you are interested in like Resolve and moving to it, definitely do check out Jay's channel on YouTube. It's a great channel. And you do streams every Wednesday. Is that right, Jay?
Yeah, they've been gone for the last couple of weeks. They should be back, if not this Wednesday, then next Wednesday. I've been dealing with family things, not bad things, just busy things.
My one thing is I do release something called Film Color, and we're about to have release 3. And I will say this release, more than previous releases, is very kind for Resolve workflow. You can use it with other things if you're determined, but because Resolve is basically the broadest used color grading software in the world right now, I couldn't ignore couldn't ignore that for any longer, basically. So
cool. Awesome. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific for day 2, part 1.
Cool. Thanks guys.
Thank you.